Can you start out by just telling our listeners how long you've been involved with the Republican Party, whereabouts, and in what capacity?
Yeah, so I've been a Republican all my life, but only got into politics about 4 years ago. I'd been in business my whole career. Got out of college, worked for a military contractor for a few years, and then went to work for a great company in New York called St. Onge Company, and spent 23 years there. Was blessed to be president for 11 years after Mr. St. Onge retired, and I left there in early 17. Actually ran for Dallastown School Board, served in that capacity for a couple of years, but ran for state rep in 2018. Scott Wagner was running for governor and had given up his Senate seat. My predecessor, Kristen Phillips Hill, ran for and ultimately won his Senate seat, and I ran for that vacant House seat. So was elected in 18 and sworn in in 2019.
Okay, and you are in York County, and we recently interviewed Dave Zimmerman here, and the latest happening with the Republican Party and your committee seat. So how many committees are you on currently?
Currently I'm on one. I had been on four. So I had been on Commerce, Finance, and Labor and Industry, which I was removed from all three of those. We did not resign, as has been reported. We can probably talk a little bit about that in a second. I am still on the Aging Committee. And similarly, Dave, as you know, was removed from three of his four committees as well.
Can you just tell us briefly what the purpose of a committee is and what you do on your committees?
Yeah, so the committees are quite important. Any bill that originates in the House, which most bills do, first have to go through committee before they go to a full House floor vote. Similarly, a bill coming over that's been passed through the full Senate has to come to the House committees first before going to a House floor vote. So committee chairmen are quite powerful. They can determine which bills are and are not run. And the committees, in addition to voting on the bills and passing them out of committee, we also can amend those bills, kill bills, and we also hold hearings on the different, a lot of, sort of subject matter that might be relevant before we make a vote on the bills. Who
decides who goes on the committees?
There's something called the Committee on Committees, which is still a little bit of a mystery to some of us. That is chaired by Chairman Saylor from York County, who is also the head of the Appropriations Committee. I'm not sure if that goes with the Appropriations Chair or if he happens to chair both. I should know the answer to that, and I don't. But ultimately, as I understand it, the Speaker's office has to assign committees, and certainly the leader has input as well.
Okay, so I have here, and this has been making its rounds. This is from the Committee on Committees, and it's submitted by Stan Saylor, and it says that Representative Mike Jones, York County, resigns as a member of the Commerce Committee, Finance Committee, and Labor and Industry Committee. So you've already addressed this, but just once again, you did not resign. So can you tell us what happened here? What's going on with this?
Yeah, we clearly did not resign. As I know Dave shared with you as well, there would be no reason whatsoever for us to resign from committees. This was punitive. In my case, as a result of publicly endorsing challengers to Chairman Saylor, who we've mentioned, who was then defeated by Wendy Fink in York County and in the 94th District. And then I also endorsed Joe Diorsi, who challenged longstanding Representative Keith Gillespie. Keith's been in the House 20 years and chairs the Fish and Game Committee. And Diorsi was also successful in winning that seat in the 47th. So I knew when I did that there would be ramifications, and pretty clear that this was punitive for me openly endorsing two Republican challengers, not Democrats, by the way, Republican challengers, two Republicans in York. Dave Zimmerman was a bit more of a mystery because he didn't do what I did. He didn't publicly endorse anyone. But in my case, it's pretty apparent that it's payback for that. And, I'm a grown man. I can handle consequence.
So let's talk about that. Why did you support or endorse these challengers?
Yeah, so and I addressed that publicly, both at the press conference we held about a week or so before the election and in some subsequent written documents. The couple of the big ones for me, the past 2 years when we had obviously what I think were unconscionable and un-American lockdowns and then vaccine mandates, neither Stan Saylor nor Keith Gillespie really appeared anywhere virtually, maybe one or two press conferences over 2 years, while myself and others were, I was leading the Reopen York effort and similar efforts. They just were invisible for the most part. Now, they voted the right way on a lot of things on reopen legislation, but as I put it, we really needed warriors, not just legislators. And that was one. On the post-election, the whole topic of election integrity, I pleaded with my colleagues to use the budget, which is really the only arrow in our quiver when you've got Tom Wolf in the governor's office and you have this extremely activist liberal state Supreme Court. I felt very strongly last June that we needed to use the budget, particularly for election reform and to guard against vaccine mandates. The idea of firing doctors and nurses and frontline workers a year after we were hailing them as heroes, to fire them for not getting a vaccine against their will, an unproven vaccine, again was unconscionable. And they'll vote on bills that they know the governor will veto, pass the budget, and go home. And I found that unacceptable. And the straw that really then broke the camel's back for me was voting to fully fund the University of Pittsburgh after we found them engaged in what I consider just barbaric research, removing the skin from the scalps of 4- and 5-year-old babies and sewing it onto lab mice. As I said on the House floor, I like research, but what have we become? We aren't that desperate for research. And I asked if we could even just cut the funding 10%, and there wasn't even a willingness to do that. So we only needed 68 of us to stop that funding. We only got 51, including Rep. Zimmerman and others from Lancaster and York. But a number of them, including those representatives, Saylor and Gillespie, voted to fund Pitt. That's their prerogative. But I just couldn't defend it anymore. And so that, along with some other things, I'm kind of a big term limits guy as well, and I think 20 and 30 years is more than enough. And Jody Orsi and Wendy Fink just showed incredible work ethic throughout their campaigns. My conscience would not allow me not to endorse them. So,
and obviously the Republican voters in York County agreed with your assessment to some degree. They ended up coming out and voting for these challengers, and Stan Saylor, who is on the Committee on Committees, ended up being defeated. So let's talk about that a little bit more. I mean, it seems to be an unwritten rule. The good old boys club, you can't challenge the status quo. You can't go against the leadership recommendations. Did you expect that? I mean, you said you knew that you'd face some repercussions for this. Is it more or less than you expected? And what's your assessment on the Republican Party leadership when it comes to something like this?
Yeah, I figured there would be consequence. I don't take it lightly endorsing challengers to incumbents. We're colleagues. We work together. I certainly would not like it if someone did it to me. But I also feel like they were largely shooting the messenger. I've been warning my colleagues I've been very, very close to the various grassroots movements, whether it was Reopen York, which I kind of spearheaded, throughout the whole Trump campaign. We had a grassroots effort to elect President Trump in York, the battle to protect on vaccine mandates that we've talked about. I've been, warning my colleagues for the better part of 2 years that people are not happy. They've had enough. And when I give suggestions on how to address it, like using the budget, like maybe we just cut Pitt 10%. You know, by the way, they're the 27th wealthiest university in the country. They're not going to miss a few dollars. And things like that. It's not that, well, Mike, you know, we can't do that or that's a bad idea. It's just an unwillingness, and you know, they're just obstinate about it. And as I say, I love my party. I'm proud to be a Republican, been a Republican all my life. Every Republican, you know, I believe in Reagan's big tent concept. We don't all have to agree. But when you campaign on these issues, and when you're putting forth that you're really fighting, when you're not fighting, you might be voting, you might be giving lip service, but we're not really fighting. Passing a bill that we know the governor's going to veto and going home, not being out there with the people when they're hurting and suffering, that's not fighting. And so I just want Republicans to do what they say they're going to do, quit saying it or get out of the way, and let somebody in there who will do it. Again, they don't have to agree with me on every issue. I'm passionate and opinionated, as you can imagine, but I'm not arrogant. You know, I don't have the corner on good ideas. There's plenty of room for differing opinions. But when you're telling people you're fighting and you're not really fighting, then it's time to go. And I think, sort of like the Bible says in Revelation, I wish you were hot or cold, but you're lukewarm, so I spit you out. And I fear that our party is lukewarm and going to be spit out. And I think that's a common problem when you get in the majority. You know, leadership tends to, it's like in sports, you know, you're winning the game. People elected us and put us in office with strong majorities, and then you go into prevent defense. And you stop making tough votes and you avoid tough subjects. And, you know, you have to compromise when you have a Democrat governor. I get that. But I actually think it's going to weaken our party over time. And so I think electing people like Joe DiOrsi and Wendy Fink is going to strengthen the party. It's nothing personal to Representatives Saylor and Gillespie. I like them personally. They've had good, long careers. But, you know, this is like a socialist blitzkrieg that's coming at us the last couple of years. And as I said earlier, we need to be strategic and smart. We can be gentlemen. We can be kind. But we also need to be warriors. We need to be bold and strong and courageous. And you know, I don't get it right all the time myself. But it's like Edmund Burke said: we have too many. You know, we have all that's necessary for evil to triumph is good men to do nothing. And the time for doing nothing is over.
You mentioned the fact the Republican Party is lukewarm, or potentially, and that's an assessment that I share. My concern is the Republican Party is not taking a stand on things, and it may come to the point where it is spit out, as you put it, or split. And can you speak to the fact that what will become of the Republican Party if leadership isn't able to see, one, what a lot of the people want, as evidenced by the fact that these two incumbents in York County were defeated, and even more importantly, perhaps, just what is right and righteous? And do you think that the Republican Party can last and should last if this is the way they're going to operate?
Well, if it's the way they're going to operate, then probably not. You know, it's a little bit like a church that doesn't preach the gospel. You know, you become a well-meaning social club, but nobody's getting, you're not really accomplishing anything. So I hope this is a wake-up call. The fact that Joe and DiOrsi and Fink won with big numbers. You know, they didn't just win; they won strongly. Should be a wake-up call to our leadership and to all of us in the party that people are tired of talk and they want to see results. And I think some of that, Chris, even came through with, you know, you look at President Trump. He was only in office 4 years. Was berated from the day he was elected. Had all kinds of obstacles, including his own party, in his way. And he still accomplished more than any president in my lifetime. I never thought I would see Reagan's equal. And Trump could have used a little bit of Reagan, be a little more presidential at times. But if you look at what he accomplished, and so I think people saw it firsthand that you can do what you say you're going to do. You can be undeterred. It helps when you've got business people at the helm who don't need the job, and have, see how the real world works. And and obviously he had executive authority, and he's the president of the United States. He's not a legislative body like ours. So in fairness, it definitely hurts when you don't have the governorship. I get that. But I think people saw firsthand what happens when you do what you say you're going to do, and you can accomplish a lot of great things. And so I hope it's awake. I still think that the Republican Party is the best vehicle for the conservative movement. If we don't wake up, I think you'll see people just not voting. You might see people moving, to the Libertarian Party. I am glad that the president did not start a separate party, meaning President Trump. But I'm still a believer in working within the party, and just that the conservative voices like myself and Rep. Zimmerman and many others can't be silent, and we just have to refuse to be ignored. And that's sort of what I've been trying to accomplish.
Did you have any conversations with GOP leadership after this announcement, which I think was the week of May 23rd, that you removed from your committee? Did you have any conversation with Stan Saylor, with Speaker Cutler, Representative Benninghoff about this?
I've spoken with the Speaker and the leader. Very brief conversation with Representative Saylor, who I would like to say handled it like a gentleman. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that he's not wasn't working against me behind the scenes afterwards. But that's it's the same thing with me endorsing. As I said, it's business. It's nothing personal. And there's, consequences have actions. I made a decision. There's consequences. A lot of things in life, when you make tough decisions and do the right thing, have consequence. So, but to Rep. Saylor's credit, I think he has committed that he's going to finish strong and honor his, fulfill his obligations as the Appropriations Chair. And I think we all respect and appreciate that. Very brief conversation with him, but he was a gentleman, shook my hand, and that's all I could ask for. I've spoken with both the Speaker and the leader, and as I've shared here, I said, there's I knew there'd be consequence. If you want to move my seat on the floor and take some committees, you can. I'm not going to whine and fuss about it. We've seen others rise up in opposition to it. I did not. I didn't have anything to do with that, and I did what I did. My conscience is clear. I did what I knew in my heart I had to do, and we'll just see how things play out.
Now, what about your constituents, those who voted for you, those people you represent? I mean, they might be looking at this, and I know many of them are, and saying, well, we've lost a voice, if you will, for us in these committees, and what would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, thank you to everybody that, again, it wasn't my idea, but I think within about 24 hours there was a movement online and elsewhere to call leadership and say that Dave and I should be reinstated to our committees. We've been looking a little bit into the rules. I'm not totally sure they can do exactly what they did. We're still kind of researching that. I think maybe we have to be on at least 2. I think Rep. Zimmerman in particular deserves some additional consideration because, again, he didn't do what I did. He didn't do a public endorsement. I think that was just a personal thing because he didn't come out as strongly for Senator Allman as they wanted to, and so forth. But for my constituents, rest assured, I have plenty of ways to continue to fight for good legislation and for change that does not require me to be on these 3 committees. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's a wise decision by leadership, but it's their prerogative. And I think the constituents of the 93rd District aren't very happy about it, and a lot of people across the state aren't very happy about it. But just like my actions have consequence, so does their decision. But rest assured, I will continue to fight for good legislation, whether I am or am not on any committees.
This whole thing has brought to some people's attention just how do these committees work, what's going on here, who's in charge of this, who has the authority to put people on and remove them, and that would probably be more than we can get into now. Right. But certainly some people would say, well, it shouldn't be this way, that there's this much control in the party. But as it stands now, what would it take to get you back on these committees? Is it a change, obviously a change in heart and current leadership, but what would it take to change leadership to the point where maybe this sort of thing wouldn't happen?
You're trying to stir the pot here a little bit now, aren't you, Chris? No.
It's my job.
Yes, I understand. You do a good job with it. So, and I appreciate you having me, by the way. Yeah, near term, the current leadership would have to have a change of heart and reverse course. They probably would have a hard time undoing everything and probably need to save a little face. If I was in their shoes, which I'm not, I think I would give Rep. Zimmerman all of his committees back. Yeah, maybe if they want to take one as a token, and probably give me one or two back is probably what I'd do. I can live with the seat change on the House floor, and if they want to take one or two to make a statement, and if it helps keep the peace within the party, I'm okay with that. Going into next session, we elect new leaders. To answer your question, we elect leaders. So whoever the newly elected members are going into next session, they'll vote on a slate of leaders. There's 8 different leadership positions, and they're all voted on independently. But assuming we're still in the majority, that would assume we have the Speaker of the House, then we have the leader and the Appropriations Chair. We know there'll be a new Appropriations Chair because Representative Saylor has lost. We have at least one other retirement, Representative Mosser, who is the caucus administrator. He's retiring. So there'll be at least a couple of new faces there just due to retirements and losses. But every session we vote on those things, and that'll be made by a lot of new members coming in because we have a lot of retirements this year.
So these are people you work with, all the time, but the Republican Party, I think people looking at it, it seems like there's a split within the party. There are those who are more concerned about liberty. There are those who are concerned about taking action, as you've mentioned here. And I know you've made clear you would love to see the Republican Party rise up and take action on these things. Can you speak, though, to what you see within the party in the state of Pennsylvania as far as a divide within the party? How many Mike Jones are there out there that would do something like this and would be willing to stand up to leadership? Are you in the great minority? Is there a chance that a movement within the Republican Party in Pennsylvania could lead to someone like you being elected as leader or speaker or something like that?
Well, I probably won't be elected anytime soon. So there, a lot of good questions in there. My world, keep in mind, is predominantly within the Republican caucus within the House of Representatives at the state level. So that's what I'm addressing, more so than say, national politics or anything like that.
Yeah, just within the House.
I don't. Yeah. So I don't personally see it as a split. We've always had factions, and understand that Pennsylvania is a very diverse state, as you know. And in fairness, there are a number of my colleagues that are winning districts that I could never win. Guys that are winning over in Delaware County and Montgomery County and Chester County and Bucks County, places like that. Traditionally, those collar counties, or in recent times at least, the collar counties around Philadelphia, that weren't necessarily big supporters of, say, President Trump. Those areas have been getting bluer. And conversely, Western and Central PA, which was traditional kind of blue-collar Democrats, they've been going more and more red. My point is, there are always going to be people, again, coming back to Reagan's big tent, there are Republicans in the Southeast and a few other pockets that simply can't vote the way that people like myself and Dawn Kiefer in York County and Dave Zimmerman and others can vote from red districts. I think what frustrates us is a lot of people in red districts, some of them even redder than mine, refusing to really stand up and fight for conservative principle. And when we have a majority, we have 113 to 90 majority. So on any given vote, we can have 10 or 11 people voting no, which gives a lot of flexibility. So I don't necessarily see it as a split. I just think we need to push right a little bit more. I think we've gotten not so much, liberal or anything. I think just lukewarm, as I've been saying. I think people respect when you actually do what you say you're going to do and stand up and fight, even if they don't agree with everything, if that makes sense. And we can be gentlemen about it. I'm not talking about being mean and ugly and lying, cheating, and stealing, but we need to fight. And, times are changing very quickly. The Democrats really aren't Democrats anymore. I mean, this is socialism. This is socialism versus America. And I don't think a lot of Republicans have the proper sense of urgency that they need to have. And that's the problem I see. It's not so much that they're, that they're all rhinos or whatever. It's just that there's not enough urgency and there's not enough strength to really be bold that these times call for.
But if these Republican legislators and representatives are going to be voting on things like funding for Pitt and other things like that, how can they be part of that move, right, if you will, if you're going to use that language? And you mentioned people in other counties that can't vote. I'm assuming it's because of if they voted on those things, they'd lose their support. They have to be a little more moderate. But if that's going to be the game plan, won't we just continually slide further and further left or past the middle and prop up a semi-socialist state?
It's possible. So I do think I think that they need to be challenged. I've certainly seen instances where people are saying they can't make a vote that I'm pretty well convinced they can make. I've looked at some of the results in some of those elections, and there are certainly some of them that can't, that are winning by very narrow margins and would have trouble on some of the pro-life and pro-gun issues that the majority of us embrace. But I think you're correct. I think if we don't start doing what we say we're going to do, I think it'll actually, the prevent defense that I'm calling it, a lot of times, as you know, if you're a sports fan, backfires, Right. And we've won large majorities campaigning on conservative principles. There is no reason not to follow through and carry that out. So I think it's just a matter of pushing people to make some tougher votes. I think there's areas where we could be more creative on what I call horse trading. A lot of times compromise just means watered down or doing nothing or voting on easy stuff. Even though I've been ranked 2 years in a row as the most conservative legislator in the House or Senate, it was a four-way tie this past year in the House. I should give credit to Frank Ryan and Paul Schemmel and Dawn Kiefer very quickly. And Zimmerman and others were not far behind. Basically, to answer your earlier question, there's probably 30 or so of us that you would consider the conservative bloc within that 113. You probably have 12 or 15 or so moderates on any given day or subject, and then the rest are kind of largely do what leadership tells them to do, or vote how they tell them to vote. That's sort of the breakdown to answer your question. But for example, I've been heavily involved in criminal justice reform, which a lot of conservative groups have been embracing, Americans for Prosperity, American Conservative Union, Commonwealth Partners, and various others. The president started down that path. So for example, I've got a bill, we just took it out of my name, so it might have a chance of passing. But dignity for incarcerated women, looking at some of the probation reform and things like that, where we want to get we don't want people going back to jail. We want to get them integrated into the workforce. Good common sense. I think even good Christian legislation that is very important to particularly, not exclusively, but particularly to black Democrats in the city, Philly and Pittsburgh. Who in turn I think would be more than willing to vote for some good pro-business legislation. We are so economically uncompetitive here in Pennsylvania. That again is a leadership thing. We've got great opportunity to horse trade here and have win-win situations. Those are the kind of things where we don't have to sacrifice our conservative principle. We just got to get creative and push the issue and get it done, rather than avoiding it.
Yeah, and the reason I'm kind of pressing that question is because with what's happening now with you and Representative Zimmerman, it's causing at least many of your supporters and supporters of Zimmerman and others to really question, can the party achieve these goals if this is how they're going to treat the people that we have elected and we believe are promoting these conservative values. So you mentioned the leaders in the counties where they can't vote a certain way, but that in of itself, wouldn't that be compromise to say, well, I'm not going to vote what I know is right because it might cost me my seat in November? And doesn't the Republican Party need to be able to take the loss, if you will, in order to stand on principle and the right thing?
Yeah, and there is a theory. I haven't been around Harrisburg that long, but there is a belief that when you have a large majority, you're actually less effective. When you have a smaller majority, it forces people to stick together. Like I said, I think it's a combination, right? So there are definitely votes that I've seen members say they don't want to make that I'm pretty sure they could make that would not cost them an election. So I think there's a certain amount of poor-mouthing going on there. As I said, I've got colleagues in some of those counties around Philly that aren't going to vote on exactly as I do, but at the same time, there's votes you're seeing that they can't vote on that I'm pretty sure they could vote on. Okay. Second of all, like I already mentioned, I think there's things where we could be horse trading some things with the Democrats and the governor that aren't really compromised. They're good. It's good legislation, specifically, criminal justice reform being one of those. Third, I think we as Republicans, going back to that concept of the big tent, we've got to start to broaden our base. Specifically, what I mean by that is the Latino vote and the black vote. Now, we're not going to get 51% of the black vote anytime soon, but the fact that we're only drawing 8 or 9% is inexcusable. And I think it's because the Democrats have taken them for granted and done basically nothing for them in 50 years, but we ignore them. The Republican mindset is the way you win the black vote is to try to rack up more votes elsewhere. I think we need to take our conservative message unapologetically to the black community. Why are we aborting 10 times more black babies, beautiful black babies, than white babies? Well, why is it that black folks aren't allowed to own guns in the city, but we are? There's a lot of things. We don't have to compromise, I don't think black folks like paying a lot of tax and paying high gas prices, but we can't ignore them. We have to deliver the message. And we're not going to get 51%, but we can get 8 up to 15 or 20. Same thing with the Latino vote. A strong Catholic heritage there, very pro-life. We should be getting 60, 70% of that vote, but you have to work for it and earn it. So that's other ways where we can grow that base, if that makes sense, without compromising any principle at all. You just have to deliver the message, right? You can't ignore people. And I think for too long we've ignored that segment. So as we have a lot of these upper middle class white folks in the suburbs leaving the party, a lot of them, quite frankly, I think are keyboard warriors that just like to say nice stuff and pass the buck. But some of those people that were put off by President Trump or whatever, we need to backfill that with other voters. And so I think that's a big part of it. Like I said, I think we can be more sophisticated in how we negotiate. We should be using the power of the purse strings a lot more when we control the budget. That's a big tool that we haven't used. So there's a lot of areas like that. It's a long answer to a complicated question, but and none of that involves compromising principle.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot to it and a lot that needs to be addressed. And the discouragement among many is now we have two representatives that the people really supported and have been removed from these committees. And yeah, we could say that's how it works. It's the good old boy system. It's the Republican Party. That's how the Democrat Party would operate as well. And this is what we have to deal with. At the same time, it doesn't seem like it's going in a good direction. So as we come to a close here, just coming back to where we started with the removal from these committees, what do you think is the proper way that within the Republican Party these types of things should be handled? I know you mentioned, well, maybe take one seat away. I mean, is that even right to be taking committee seats away based on how you support a candidate? Because isn't the idea that we should be representing the people with choices and then letting them choose, and individuals are free to vote how they want and support who they want? Wouldn't that be a healthier Republican Party?
No, I think so. And to be clear, I do want to clarify, I don't think it's a terribly wise decision. I'm simply saying that when I endorsed Wendy Fink and Joe Diorsi, that I knew there probably would be consequence. So I, as the as a representative, as I said, I'm a grown man, I can handle some consequence. I'm not going to be the one standing up and whining and fussing about it, right? The people are doing that. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. The reason that this isn't a terribly wise decision is because it ignores the fact that the candidates that I endorsed were victorious. And they were victorious by significant margins, 11%, I believe it was, and 20%. So we continue the same message I've been trying, the warning I've been putting forth for the last 2 years, because I do love my party, I love my colleagues. Okay, I'm surprised it wasn't worse, quite frankly, meaning I'm surprised there weren't more primaries and there weren't more defeats, okay, because I know how angry and how scared, people were the last couple of years. I think, quite frankly, if it weren't for Joe Biden being so bad, that took some of that angst and that ire off of the establishment Republicans and moved it back to the Democrats. I think if these elections had been held 6-12 months ago, it would have been even worse. But you are exactly correct. Do what you want to do to me is my point. I'm not losing any sleep over it from a personal perspective. But what we're doing is ignoring that conservative base, which is it's more than just the base. There's 60-70% of the people voting this way, or 50 or 55, 65%, whatever. And I don't think they get it, and this is what I've been trying to warn about, and people aren't going to accept lukewarm anymore. Now, with that said, and I'll wrap up, leadership has a challenge that they're trying to keep 113 currently members together, and there's a lot of members who are not happy about what I did. Okay, and so leadership, in their defense, is trying to strike a little bit of an internal balance to say, hey, are we going to let this slide, right? Versus we're free thinkers and people can do what they want to do. So I'm simply saying internally, they're still my colleagues. I'm a team player. I'm trying to make the party stronger. Some of them don't see it that way. It put leadership in a bit of a tough situation. The bigger issue is what you're touching on. And I did make this clear to at least one of the folks and one of the leaders. I said, I'll take the consequence, but understand we will not be ignored. People are not going to be ignored anymore. And if we continue down this lukewarm path, we're going to be spit out. And that's not acceptable. So I think we need to strike the right balance there and understand, if the people I endorsed had lost 80-20 or 70-30, this would be a much different discussion, but they didn't, and this is what we've been trying to warn my party and my colleagues. So I hope it's a wake-up call, and we do a better job of start following through on our promises and doing what we say we're going to do.
Well, Representative Jones, thank you for your time. I know a lot of people are concerned, and hopefully it'll be helpful for them to hear from you on what's going on here and why you did what you did and what you believe is in the best interest of the party and ultimately of the people. And we will continue to follow this. So thanks again for your time.
I appreciate you having me, and I do appreciate everybody's support on this. And like I said, just know I did what I felt in my heart I had to do, and my conscience is clear, so I can live with that.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.